Hello, I'm Nan Simonson. Just got in from the wind and I'm kind of fixing things. Doesn't matter, it's always looking like this. So, I missed I missed last week our Facebook live. I was away on a retreat and I was with some people that are like me, about to get certified as a eating disorder recovery coach under a program that was developed by Dr. Dory McCubbery called the EDIT technique, and it's EDIT, Eating Disorder Intuitive Therapy. And I was whole food plant based the entire time. I even made dinners for us for the week, whole food plant based, but nobody else was completely, and they actually loved the meals. And they enjoyed the meals, they loved the food, they are inspired to become more plant based, but for a variety of reasons weren't sure that they should even consider that if they weren't ready to give up meat, dairy, eggs, fish completely. And I said to them what I put on my announcement about the Facebook Live uh, that I'm doing right now, and that is, um, does eating uh, even, what did I say? Even a few more plants, does eating even a few more plants in our diet matter? And I said, I'm sorry for swearing. Oh, hell yes. Yes, it matters. I'll tell you why. You've probably heard me say this, but let me simply say one of my favorite words is crowding out. We can crowd out negative thoughts with positive thoughts. We can reframe the way we think about a thing, and we can um, bring about quite a shift in our emotional state and our mental state by the way we consider things. Well, you can do that physically as well with foods. If you learn, and sometimes this is a matter of learning, I will say that our taste buds turn over, not 100%, but to a large degree about every 2 weeks. So, what you love right now and think you can't live without, you can start to adapt to within a 2 week period of time. And then before you know it, fall in love with it. What wasn't sweet enough at one time becomes entirely sweet enough to the degree that what you were comparing it to is almost sickeningly sweet. In other words, I use the analogy all the time of the apple and the apple fritter. If you live on apple fritters, you're not going to bother with an apple. If you eat apples that seem a little bit boring and not as satisfying often enough, an apple fritter will be disgusting. It's so sweet. And when I talk about the pillars of lifestyle medicine in my book, Aging Powerfully, I wrote this a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, because I am a lifestyle medical health and lifestyle coach, and I focus on what the College of Lifestyle Medicine calls the ideal nutritional plan, and that is whole food, plant based. And as close to whole food as we can go is ideal, but this is what I'm addressing right now. Do we have to be completely whole food plant based to be healthy? And of course not. Of course not. In the blue zones, where we have the longest lived centenarians by community, they are primarily whole food plant based. Are they completely? No, they're not. In Ikaria, They celebrate weddings by serving up pig, but to the rest of the times they are heavy on fruits and vegetables and greens and grains and seeds and nuts. Um, in Okinawa, they subsist primarily on, and this was traditionally. Now, unfortunately, almost every place has been poisoned by our fast food restaurants coming in to save the day and unfortunately ruin entire populations with our fast foods. But that's another thing. Um, in Okinawa, they live primarily on sweet potatoes, those deep purple interior sweet potatoes, and yet they will have celebrations where they have other foods. So we're not talking about, although it's been 3.5 years, and I am completely whole food plant based. I don't eat any animal food, and that means no eggs, no cheese, no butter, no yogurt, no ice cream unless it's plant based, no fish, shellfish, lamb, beef, pork, chicken. And man, I'm healthier than I've been most of my life. Um, if you know my story, you also know that most of my life I had an eating disorder, and it was only when I went whole food, plant based, 3.5 years ago. It's more than 3.5 years ago that I was able to stabilize my metabolism, nourish my body so well that it affected my entire system, and was able to stop obsessing about food, and got over an eating disorder that I had for almost 55 years. So let me just talk a little bit in a, I'll say clinical way, because some people wonder why we're even talking about this subject. Um, 60 to 80% of the American diet is highly processed food. Now, meat, eggs, fish, chicken isn't highly processed. It's, in most cases, it's a chunk of something's flesh. So we're not even talking about that. So 60 to 80% plus the meat is the American diet, and plus fruits and vegetables. But unfortunately, it has been proven, cataloged. I'm trying to think of the word I'm trying to think of. Statistically noted that 5 to 7% of the American diet is fresh foods. The rest of them, fruits and vegetables, in other words, the rest of them are the meats and the processed foods. So the 60 to 80% of our diet is highly processed foods. Now, what does that mean? You know what? I'm getting a message from my computer, and I'm going to ignore it. It said action needed, but I can't read that fast to figure out what I'm supposed to do, and I hope you can see me. Let me give you sort of an answer that is true, but it's a little bit detailed. Commodity crops in America are the crops that are subsidized by the government. And so we grow massive amounts of food that is then subsidized, that can then be offered inexpensively, that can then be taken advantage of by product makers. In other words, the fast food industry, the processed food industry, food manufacturers. And those commodity foods are primarily corn, wheat, and soy. What does that mean? That means that those foods can be completely, and they are traditionally, completely denatured. The oil, there's no such thing as corn oil. With a bunch of processing and a bunch of chemicals, I can get some oil out of corn. It takes a lot of corn to get any oil out of it, but you don't get corn oil any other way than doing all this stuff to it. High fructose corn syrup, as well as the denatured corn flours or the corn starches. You have wheat, and you have your wheat gluten, you have your highly processed wheat products, and then you have the soy isolates. They take perfectly good soy that is, quite frankly, often genetically modified to have structures of, let's say, protein that are unnatural to our body and we don't assimilate that well. But then they pull that protein out and leave the good stuff behind. And what we end up with is the soy starches, the soy oils, as well as the soy protein isolates. We end up with then these products that can be very, very inexpensively turned into something that I'm going to call food type substances. When you go to a fast food restaurant, for example, I will use McDonald's because I happen to know this fact, and I Googled it recently, and it's not just them, it's a number of the fast food restaurants. And you get a hamburger, even if you got a non-meat burger, but you get a burger from there, that hamburger bun has 29 to 31 ingredients. That should be impossible because a bun is flour, water, yeast, and usually salt. 31 ingredients, 29, 28, whatever it is, that's a bunch of poison. That's a bunch of stuff that is a food type substance. And they're doing this across the board with the commodity foods, and they can do it cheaply. That's why you can get, and the quite often the meat products involved are heavily laced with fillers because they can do that inexpensively as well. And they can give these commodity crops to the animals that I won't even get into my my thoughts about how those animals are treated, but that they can give to the animals and then sell those animals uh, very inexpensively. That's all part of the farm bill, and we won't get into that. But I'm trying to say then that most of what we eat in our country is not real food, and what is inflammatory. Our whole foods that are plant-based are actually so full of not only nutrients, polyphenols, phytochemicals, phyto polyphenols, phytochemicals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, that they are very they are anti-inflammatory to our body. The foods like the high saturated fat foods, just about all of the animal based proteins are inflammatory because they stimulate something called trimethylamine that turns into trimethylamine oxide out of the liver. That's inflammatory. They cause cell growth proliferation. That's why T. Colin Campbell says you can turn on and turn off cancer with animal protein. They're inflammatory. So if our diet is what I'm saying, and it is, highly processed and then full of inflammatory foods, if you added even an apple a day, is that going to make a difference? Absolutely. If you added some carrots with that apple, some more of a difference? Sure. How about if we added a salad every day, a leafy green salad every day? Sure, that'll make a difference. Why does it make a difference? Now I'll talk to you about something else that I think a lot of you have heard about and you're familiar with, but I'll just outline what I'm talking about, and that is the microbiome. If you don't know what the microbiome is, read Will Bolshewitz, Dr. William Bolshewitz's book, Fiber Fueled. That came from a 10-year study called the American Gut Project. None of this is made up. This is real, scientifically proven, physiological um, uh, and experienced in every one of our bodies. We have a microbiome. It's a collection of trillions of cells that are throughout our body. We have a microbiome in our mouth and on our skin, but most of The microbes are in our gut, so I'll keep calling it the gut. Some people call that like an organ because it is 3 to 5 pounds of microbes that actually outnumber the amount of cells in our body. So, in other words, we're carrying that around, but really they're keeping us going. So, the microbiome is fueled by it, the bacteria produce something, a metabolite, that affects our entire body, and that metabolite is short chain fatty acids. Why would they create a metabolite? What would stimulate them to do that? Food. What is their food? Prebiotic food. The production then from the prebiotic with these microbes become a probiotic, and the postbiotic is short chain fatty acids. The short chain fatty acids are what affect our lungs, our brain, our cardiovascular system, our organs. The short chain fatty acids are metabolites that cause reactions throughout our body and keep us healthy, and are anti-inflammatory because 60 to 70% of our immune system is in our gut. Um, it serves us and keeps out the things we don't want, and takes in and utilizes the things that we do to be healthy. So we've looked at the way most Americans eat. It's called the SAD American diet, the standard American diet, SAD. We've looked at our body's microbiome and what that does. And you can read all about these things. I'm just giving you generalizations, but they are principal to our functioning as a human being. We need to feed that microbiome, and what does it eat? The microbiome eats one thing, and that's fiber. Fiber comes in one thing in plants. There isn't an animal on the planet that has fiber. There's no animal product that has fiber. The only thing that has fiber is a plant food, whole plant food, not a plant food like an apple fritter that comes from apples and wheat and oils and all of that stuff. They're so denatured, they actually disrupt the microbiome. Processed foods disrupt the microbiome because there isn't a processed food you can get that doesn't have emulsifiers, stabilizers, shelf extenders, oils that have been processed, on and on and on. And so each of those actually disrupt the microbiome, don't feed the good bugs, feed the bad bugs. Are you familiar with what we're talking about a lot now, because it's quite serious, and that is antibiotic resistance? What's happened is we've used antibiotics, overused antibiotics, to the degree that the bugs that we're trying to kill have, because things morph to try to stay alive, have become resistant to the antibiotics. And people are dying with and from things that antibiotics, all we had, were enough to quell whatever it is or was that antibiotic was made for. Not anymore. People can get an infection that no antibiotic has the power to alleviate because of antibiotic resistance. Those bugs that no longer are damaged by that particular antibiotic. Well, that happens in our gut. In other words, we feed the gut our standard American diet, we proliferate bad bugs, and the good bugs are not effective anymore. That affects our brain. Our brain doesn't work the same. Our limbic system and our cerebral cortex stop working well when our brains are affected by inflammatory foods, which is what happens, I'll say inflammatory foods, but the result of inflammatory foods causes inflammation and causes that kind of even a disconnect in our thoughts. sometimes some people are speculating, like Dr. David Perlmutter, are speculating that a lot of what we see around us right now, the uh, emotional distancing, the anger, the reactionary behavior that we're seeing in our country, they're actually speculating that a lot of it has to do with the poor dietary quality, the lack of whole foods that are plant-based that feed the gut, and the gut's proliferation of the bad bacteria to the good bacteria, and therefore the denaturing of healthy bodies. That's why chronic disease is so high, obesity is so high. All of that is affected by the balance or lack thereof in our gut. So, back to what I said, what does the gut eat? And if I want my gut to be healthy, what should I eat? Whole foods that are plant based. Because anything done to the foods, the more, I'll use the word denatured, the more processed a food is, the less the less the good bacteria, and it's bacteria, yeast, protozoas, archaea. There are a number of microbes in there, so I'll just call them bugs, and I'll call the microbiome the gut. So, the more real food that we eat, the better the combination of those bugs are going to be. The more diverse the food, the wider the variety of those bugs will be. The wider the variety, the more they can take on, the more profuse their short chain fatty acids will be. I'm again being really simplistic here. So if I want to get healthier, if I want to reduce inflammation, if I want to put off chronic disease, if I am already kind of a mess, high blood pressure, diabetes, um, uh, chronic pulmonary obstructive disease, all obesity, brain fog, early Alzheimer's, all of those can be improved by improving our gut. And it's as simple as whole foods that are plant-based that will feed the microbes in the gut. So back to my question, does it matter if I add even a little plant food? Oh, hell yes. Because every plant food, every variety, any kind, and let me remind you again of what we're referring to. We're referring to greens, all kinds of greens, vegetables, all kinds of vegetables, from broccoli to cabbage to zucchini to asparagus to artichokes. Tonight, for example, I have 2 big artichokes that we're steaming. Then we're going to have some Brussels sprouts. Then we're going to have some corn on the cob. Then we're going to have a lentil soup that has carrots and onions and parsley and bell pepper and um, oh, potato. That's a meal for a whole food plant-based person, and it's a lot of food, and it's absolutely fabulous. So I think whole food plant-based food is the most delicious way to eat, because you can add so many things. Well, our microbiomes tonight will be singing and dancing. They'll be jigging all over the place because I'm feeding a wide variety. In other words, I'm ingesting a wide variety of foods of a variety of colors, from one end of the spectrum to the other. So I got through greens and vegetables and tubers. That's every kind of potato you can think of, and the starchy vegetables like corn and peas and squashes and all kinds of grains, from amaranth to rice to wheat, whole wheat, to farro, to quinoa, that's a seed actually, and then to legumes. That's where most of us who are whole food plant-based get our protein, and that is legumes. And yet there are some who can't have legumes, that doesn't digest well with them. And I want to say, if you're one of them, it might be because if you are typically eating a standard American diet You don't have microbes that have any idea what to do with beans. You want to feed the good guys more and more of the food that you want the bacteria that is necessary to digest it, to proliferate. And you do that by starting low and slow. And Dr. Bolshewitz talks about that, low and slow, even a teaspoon one day and 2 teaspoons the next day and a tablespoon after that, and you'll start growing, you'll start feeding the good bugs and they'll take care of you. So, but there are people who don't eat legumes and are still insanely healthy whole food plant-based advocates. I'd use the word vegan, but that gets into the whole philosophical realm of the animals on our planet, which we should be paying attention to, but it doesn't dictate whether or not that's a whole food. And that's why I much prefer whole food plant-based, as close to nature as possible. That's one of the reasons I eat oat groats in the morning rather than rolled oats. Well, I shouldn't even do this, it takes time, but if I wanted the most whole oat, it's an oat groat. If I wanted a little less whole, it's still cut. If I wanted it a little less than still cut, it would be rolled. If I wanted it less than rolled, I'd get instant oats. And that's just smashed up. The more smashed up it is, it's still an oat, but the less the body has to work on it and the less the fiber is intact. It's still better than going and buying an oat bar that's full of all kinds of sugars and emulsifiers and other stuff. So eat your whole food as close to nature as possible. Eat your fruits and vegetables. I didn't even say anything about fruits last time. My gosh, there are hundreds and hundreds of delicious fruits that we could add to every meal. In other words, I'm talking about great food that will feed your microbiome, that will cause a reduction in inflammation, and probably 85% of the chronic diseases in our country are lifestyle based, caused by lifestyle choices, and can be ameliorated by these lifestyle choices. And the inflammation that is caused by a disrupted gut is at the base of all of these chronic diseases. So, does it matter if you do a little at a time? Does it matter if you even add a few more servings a day to your diet? Heck yes, it matters, because again, you're tipping the scale of your microbiome little by little. And my hope is that when you add more, you'll want more, and you'll start, use that word again, crowding out some of the less helpful foods, like the processed foods. If you get rid of anything off the top and crowd out first, crowd out the food that is indistinguishable as a food. You pull out a bag of something that looks like a puff, you find me that puff anywhere in nature. Your body hasn't a clue what to do with that piece of garbage. I know it's good. They make it so good you can't stop. Any food, even if it's made out of a healthy vegetable that's been turned into some kind of a weird puff or flattened out chip, and there's a bunch of ingredients on the bottom of the back of the package, that's not a real food. Your body doesn't know what to do with it. So I think that's all I have to say. I want to consider, or I'd like you to consider, please, 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 invest an hour and a half in a documentary that would help you understand further what I'm talking about. Why not Forks Over Knives? Start with Forks Over Knives. Get the family together. Okay, I'm going to torture you kids. We're going to watch Forks Over Knives. Or The Game Changers. You got some teenagers, they would be really interested in that, because it's about all of these people whose bodies get them through the day in terms of their careers. In other words, people in sports, all of whom, football players, strong men, basketball players, all of whom are plant-based and went plant-based, and will tell you what it did for their bodies, including allowing them to recover more quickly, go faster, and why they did it and how they did it. Watch Game Changers, watch Forks Over Knives. Understand that inflammation is is at the base of chronic disease. If you have any chronic disease, it's inflammation, and that feeding your microbiome the right foods is anti-inflammatory. And any amount matters. Any amount counts. Just go shopping, pick up beautiful fruits, vegetables, beans, grains, seeds, nuts, um, and enjoy them. I hope you're having a great day because I know I am. And if you have any questions, write me. Bye bye. Have a great day.